I watched a movie that I've been meaning to watch for ages, and I swear I must have seen part of it at my friend Tiffany's house as a kid because I know she loved this movie, but somehow I never saw the whole movie. And this is 1994's The Crow. Everyone is gasping right now because they're like, Mariah, you've seen 6,000 movies and you've never seen The Crow. Who are you? And I answered that with, I don't know. We all have gaps. So, so I finally watched The Crow, literally 2 days before the 6-month window on Filmstruck was up because I've had 6 months plus 23 years to watch this movie, and it took the limit to get me to actually watch it. I think probably the reason I've waited so long to watch it is I thought it would make me sad, knowing about the death of Brandon Lee, because obviously, not obviously, but my family was a big fan of Bruce Lee, both as a filmmaker and as a martial artist, and we watched Bruce Lee, Dragon the Bruce Lee story like a million times. And actually, I think one of the first times my parents had to kind of explain racism to me was when one of the many times we watched that movie, and I didn't understand why her, Linda's mother was so upset that she was dating Bruce Lee. And I was like, he's really hot and he's like good. Like, what's the problem here? And my mom had to be like, some people, and it was awful. So there was all this, baggage on it. And obviously, The Crow stars Bruce Lee's son, Brandon Lee, who died during the filming. And the Bruce Lee biopic came out like a month after Brandon Lee died. And then a year later, The Crow was released after some crazy state-of-the-art special effects to complete the handful of scenes that he hadn't completed before he died. And it's one of those things that, like, the backstory is horribly sad and also helped change and make things safer. And it's awful that in this world someone has to die before things get better. But that's pretty much how I've noticed most things. Like, most laws come into effect after, instead of saying, we should have this, someone has to die or be raped or be harassed to the point of losing their job or all kinds of things before we have laws that protect people. But that's neither here nor there. So all of that to say, this is why it's taken me so long to finally watch this movie. And I'm pretty sure if I'd watched this as a kid, I would have been as addicted to it as The Craft. It's a very similar sort of goth film. It came out a couple years earlier than The Craft, but The Craft was like for the ladies and The Crow was for the men, except that everyone should like both movies. It's based on a comic by James O'Barr. And I have never read the comic, so I don't know. But in this film, Brandon Lee plays Eric DeRaven, who on the night before Halloween, known as Devil's Night in Detroit, is murdered along with his fiancée. The next year, he is brought back to life by a magical crow. You're not really sure what this crow can do, where the crow came from. You just go with it. And he comes back all in this really cool, like, white makeup and great goth outfit and goes and kills everybody that killed him and his girlfriend. And he has to, like, hunt them down. And so you're following him while he's on this quest. You also see how his life affected others. So you see like a young woman who was their neighbor, who they were sort of watching over her because her mother was addicted to drugs, and this like ghost crow version of him comes back and kind of helps her a little bit. You also see the cop who found them when they died, played by Ernie Hudson. He comes back. I'm about to sneeze. Oh my god. He's still there as a cop, and the crow sort of interacts with him, including at one point, one really touching sequence, pulling out the 30 hours of pain that he suffered while watching his fiancée die. Like the cop was with her as she was dying, and it took 30 hours, and so he has all this pain. And that's a very important plot point. So really, it's just a lot of beautifully choreographed action sequences. Really great criminals. mostly played by Michael Wincott and Bai Ling. I love Bai Ling, or Ling Bai, however you want to say her name. She is so good in everything she's in. There's also David Patrick Kelly. You'll recognize him from Twin Peaks. And John Polito, who is in everything and is fantastic. He's very grimy in this movie. And to scare everybody, Tony Todd, which I need to point out in this week's Riverdale, if you're not watching Riverdale, there was a sequence, it's a triptych this last week, and at one point, Tony Todd pulls up in a car and picks up the guys, and I, like, flipped out and was like, oh, shit, it's the Candyman. Like, who does that? Who lets the Candyman come and pick somebody up in a car? Like, don't do that. That's a movie from the 90s that I did see as a youth, and it scared me. So this is a beautifully choreographed film. It has the same sort of visual aesthetic that you expect from Proyas. I did not say the director's name earlier. It's the same guy from Dark City. This is why the other reason I finally got to it was I've watched Dark City and I feel like I should have seen The Crow first. So this was Alex Proyas. And the stunt double who helped finish Brandon Lee's performance with early CGIing of his face on his body was actually Chad Stileski, who was one of the stunt coordinators on the film, but also a stunt coordinator on The Matrix. And later, co-directed John Wick and directed John Wick 2. So it's the same guy. That's interesting. What else? The soundtrack on this film is like all of the metal bands and things that you would expect from a 1994 sort of goth thing. There's a couple of really great sequences with the Cure, some Cure songs. It's just sleek and stylish, and I think it feels more rote now than it probably did 20 years ago, because I think a lot of films have been inspired by this film. And so it's kind of like when you read Shakespeare, and if you don't realize that Shakespeare sort of was the starting point for a lot of cliches, you just think Shakespeare's full of cliches, but you're like, no, this is where it originated. And I feel like it borrowed from some things from the 80s and then built on some things that became very emblematic of 90s goth culture. So I feel like this movie like single-handedly created like Hot Topic. What else was I going to say about this? Great score, cinematography. Oh, it's beautifully romantic. The sequences with Brandon Lee and his fiancée, played by Sophia Shinas, are gorgeous and lovely. Brandon Lee gives an amazing performance. Like, this is what you call a star-making performance. He is so charming, and he's one of these characters he's not really an anti-hero, because, I mean, he is in that he's killing people, but he's, that typical or prototypical vigilante character where he's killing only villains and is actually like a heart of gold kind of person. And the book Save the Cat, like, he loves cats. There's several sequences with cats in this movie. There's one beautiful cat in this film. So he can't be he can't be a bad guy, because like he loves cats. There's villains with cats, I know. But he's just so good in this, and there's a couple of sequences, silent sort of sequences of just pure magnetism that I think that's another reason I was kind of afraid to watch this film, was I knew that I would see a startling and amazing performance, and then I would be so even more bereft of the fact that we lost such a talented performer in such a dumb way. Like, it's awful. Just awful. So a lot of the choreography was actually done by Brandon Lee. Obviously, he is a martial artist, or was a martial artist. And it's just a great film. You can see a thread of from the sort of 80s action films into where we came in the 90s with these sort of slick, almost neo-noir-esque action films, like this one, like The Matrix, like I have another one in my head that I'm trying to think of. I don't know what I was thinking, but there's a whole bunch of these films that have a very similar feel to them. The 90s has a lot of great cinema, and not just like the independent, everyone thinks of 90s and they think of like the great rise of independent cinema. And there was great 90s independent cinema. There were some great studio films as well. And I think this falls under that. Although, was it Miramax? It's not even really a studio film, it's Miramax. But although you can't really call a $23 million film independent either, so I don't know where this lies. But this is a beautiful film, and you should definitely seek it out. It's on Filmstruck for another couple of days. I think it's there till Saturday. And it's just unfortunate that it has such a sad history attached to it. But it's definitely, I think, even if it didn't like have a cult following, it'd be worth seeking out to see this dynamic and amazing performance from Brandon Lee. Probably goes down as one of the great sort of star-making it's one of the great star-making performances, period, and unfortunately, he never got to do more. But I think if he had gotten to do more, we would have seen some really great stuff from him, because he clearly had charisma. Sadness. So this was Alex Proyas' The Crow. I really enjoyed it. I recommend it. Great soundtrack, slick production, so many great performances. Just a great film altogether. It's from 1994. Definitely, if you haven't already seen it, check it out. You've probably already seen it. I'm probably the last person in the entire world who hasn't seen this movie. 1994's The Crow.